Like the old-time bent press, like to execute it that way, you need a lot of weight. And that's kind of the intimidating thing, learning these old techniques, is that in order to even get into position or feel like you can manipulate yourself under the barbell, like you need a good amount of weight. There's a huge fear factor component to old-time bent pressing, because once you get in position, you then got to dip, and you got to dip way deeper than you think, that's when you get to a certain point, it's scary. So that's why it requires so much practice. And then you do have to have some prerequisites, shoulder strength, to the ability to just hold that much weight there on your delts, the amount of force being driven into your rotator cuff, and you need a crazy amount of torso rotation. So this is where it really exposes the mobility required to move under the bar. And it's crazy to think that that was like the gym lift that you learned first. It's like when you went to the gym, it's like you're gonna learn the bent press, and then everything else will come. It's like, yeah, it kind of takes care of a lot of like learning, taking time to learn a bent press. You can see how it does take care of a lot of prerequisites for a lot of other things. It would be interesting to see what those athletes could do now. Like even if they were put into the systems of the way we do things now to like get in shape for CrossFit or get in shape for weightlifting, or it would be crazy to see what they could do. I just envision like a Warner Gunther, just a freak, right? Like most of them were the genetic freaks. Like that's why they were so strong and diverse. A really nice rotational stretch that's a little more specific to a position that I'm going to be in on a bent press. And the focus on these exercises is that back leg. So crossing the front, the back leg is now being stretched. So with this one, I'm rotating to that side and reaching down. Not a big ROM there, especially if I'm really weight bearing on the back leg, just like I would on a bent press. I'm going to be moving the weight to the side of the body and holding a maximal amount of weight that my shoulder can maintain in as much external rotation as possible. So we want big range there, and we want to feel like it's available to us. So I like warming up with, I'll just move this mic a little bit so it doesn't get blurry. Warming up with the lateral pullovers. I like this setup. Like you could go cross bench and get a bend in your spine and through the ribs, which would be more specific to bent pressing. But this really just allows me to isolate the shoulder girdle. A nice stretch through the teres muscles through the shoulder. And I'm trying to keep my arm in as much external rotation as possible when I come up here, like I would on a bent press. I'm going to actually do some side pressing, just nice and light. And then I'm going to go through some seated bent pressing. And the seated position is nice because it actually puts our hips in more of a resting position so we can focus on what's actually happening through the torso. But the side press is nice. And I think for anyone that's just looking to gain the benefits of what an old-time bent press technique can provide, the side press is probably the go-to one that won't cause as much interference with all other training modalities because we're muscling out the weight. So it is much more of a pressing action, not losing momentum, but you're trying to, as best as you can, mimic what you would be doing on a bent press, which is shifting into the pressing side hip, maintaining that stake leg, that pressing through the floor as you dip down. So you're trying to maintain the weight in that pattern, in that stacked position. So as long as you're side pressing in a way that's specific to that, you're still getting a lot of benefits that you could gain from bench pressing. You don't have to go quite as heavy, but you can go pretty heavy on side pressing. Now the rules of a side press, because it's still a competition lift, are strictly like 12-inch stance. So a strict 12-inch stance where bench press doesn't matter as much. And what's helpful on a side press is turning your feet away from the forward position so that you get some leverage and rotation. So now when I do rotate and push back, I've already created a position that allows me to sink into my hips, and we just rotate and press. So no resting. The elbow does not rest at all on the side press. It just presses up. And I'm only going as deep as I have to lock the weight out. As you go heavier on a side press, you'll get to points where you're here and you have to keep rotating and pushing to get under the load. And if you wanted to make it more of a mobility type exercise, you could press it up and then actually reach down to stretch. That's more so windmill type patterns, but this one's just strictly more about muscling out and building up that strong shoulder. And knowing that you have to use a good amount of weight to bench press with that technique, it is helpful to have these little regressions because you can get a better warm-up. So instead of loading up to your max and trying to find position, just side press up to a decent amount of weight. Use the seated bench press to start feeling like you can actually use more weight and start practicing the pattern of dipping under. What is funny about good and bad sides though, is most people will like execute the best technique on their shitty side because you have to. You can't muscle it out as much. So now the seated bench press. You could go heavy on these, and you kind of want to because now we're trying to think about getting the elbow pinned and rolling and getting under the weight for a lockout. So the rib cage, we're trying to create a ramp. So if I can learn to teach myself to dip down far enough, then we start to create this ramping effect where the elbow can just lock out so that I don't have to have as much range on that position. But it's a bit harder to get the depth that you could get from standing on a bench press, like a seated position. But what's nice here is like the hardest part about a bench press is drifting. So when you get into a standing position, you're always like, you're leaning and moving away from the leg that we're trying to keep all the weight on. So the biggest part is everyone drifts forward away from that. So now resting the hips, what that actually does for us is it keeps them staked down. So now all we really have to focus on is what's happening through the upper body. We don't have to worry as much about where the weight's being based in the legs. We're resting right on the bench. So obviously, if I lift off the bench or seat, I've drifted. So the big one here now is I need to get a lot more rotation in place, which is what we want on the bench press. So I'm very heavily rotated at the start so that when I dip down, I'm going to actually be able to get under the weight and keep the stacked position. One of the most popular techniques that the Saxon brothers used, the heaviest bench pressers of all time, was just barbell max holds. So they would just spot each other and put like more than they could bench press and just hold and just be like super rotated in that isometric position. Yeah. So you can only imagine they were using 400, 450 pounds, just holding, which I've done those with heavier weight than I can bench press. And it's a pretty cool isometric exercise. Like you can feel like your rotator cuff and everything and how your body's just like stabilizing and finding a way to hold that weight. more restricted in rotation on that side. But how much better was my technique?
It was better.
I had to, right? I had to rotate more, and I had to be so much more patient. But the funny thing too is, like, I have had a lot of issues on my left side. Like, I've had bad injuries growing up. And I mean, fuck, I've tried every rehab exercise or corrective. And when I started bent pressing, even though this side wasn't able to do a lot and still isn't, when I bent press and really focus on the technique, there's something going on here that just shifts things in place, and it just like feels like better than anything I've tried. Like, a lot of people talk about SI joint stuff and whatever real evidence there is to show that that's an actual thing, but any of those kind of weird symptoms I have sometimes, they just seem to start to dissipate more when I start bent pressing, because I'm just spending time in extreme rotation. And like, I think it just comes back down to the intensity principle. You know, how hard are you working in these patterns that you just never train? The bent press like puts you there, and you have to be motivated to do it. You have to be motivated to do anything, right? If you're trying to get yourself, okay, that's the catch-22 when it comes to all this pain-free talk, is that you have to actually be willing to put yourself through some pain to get out of pain, which I don't mean injure yourself, but you have to work to feel a threshold, to feel the burn. And that stuff, all that uncomfortable stuff, is actually a predictor of progress. So as we don't feel it as much, we know we're improving, but we then have to find a way to do that again, right? So it is kind of funny, right? The catch-22, you know, this is how you get out of pain. It's like, well, I don't think most people realize that you have to expose the pain, elicit some pain, and slowly progress from there. But this is what you see in kettlebell training, is high rep kettlebell bent pressing, and that's a totally different technique. We're rotating, which is good, but we're kind of squatting right under the weight right away. So you can do reps. You can do all these bent press reps. Yeah, that, you know, the technique we're talking about is like how you have to position and use the body to manipulate yourself under a crap load of weight. But he was one that started talking about higher rep work with that stuff. And he was an innovator. He was one of the best. But yeah, he did high rep work with sub-maximal load on a bent press, which is pretty crazy to think about. So, I mean, I'll just warm up with the bar. And this is even just in getting space and the bar set. So you can even see here already, the bar is helping me to get set up. I can feel the drift over here bring me into better rotation. And then I can start thinking about how when I get under the bar, I'm also starting in rotation, quite a bit of rotation, so that I don't spin out as much. So rotate away. You can see I can spin the bar to the point where I know it's going to be at lockout. And all those things you saw that we were warming up are applied here. So my weight is stacked on the hip with my elbow wrist down through the heel. And I'm dipping, standing up. So I mean, once you have those qualities, it's nice to play around with an empty barbell. Still 20 kilos, that's a decent amount of weight, but like people that can't press out 20 kilos really well and with ease could do that once they learn those techniques with the bent press and get some reps in. So even just as a mobility warm up and stuff.
Like there's no way in hell I'm ever pressing 93 pounds. Like, and I shouldn't say that.
With one arm.
Like, that's what I mean. Like,
Well, yeah.
There's no chance in hell.
And even when you do see someone do one arm, like that was a lift back then, a one arm strict dumbbell press.
Yeah.
There was never close to amount of weights being used, but mechanically to put the most amount of weight up, you have to start manipulating your body to some degree around the weight and creating some momentum. I might be able to showcase this beside better here. where you can see how rotated I am in the back. But now, this is a whole thing too. We can start practicing with the bar. Okay, no squat racks back then. What's the most efficient way to get this bar on my shoulder and set so that I can use all my energy to do a bent press? So, centering my grip here and bringing the bar close to my shoulders. And you know, depending on the amount of weight you're using, I can even leverage this elbow into my hip, right? Because when I tip, I can now have support here, and I'm actually going to use this hand to help tip up as well and balance that bar out. So now I can find that position that puts me in the best rotation. Keep my weight pushed, stacked. And that external rotation, it like wants to twist out because of my limited external, like it wants to twist out. That feels nice though. Just lightweight on my weak side is so therapeutic. There are other things to think about here now too. How to get under the weight. So now you're using heavier weight. I'm just standing, and some of them did do that. Some people prefer that. Like once there's one guy online, he's got a few 110 kilo bent presses. Doesn't really dip under the weight. So like locks it out and just stands. So you can just imagine, the obliques, the trunk just stands. But the other one here is squatting. So once I reach a point of lockout, I can dip this stake leg down. And now I can actually use that leg to press up and not just rely on all my obliques. But that's still pretty crazy. It's pretty nuts. Now, I think like anything like this tipping, and you could take the weight from a squat rack if you don't have the right amount of equipment, but you do need to find some clips for this. And I have found these ones. I know I've been talking about bells of steel, but these are from Rogue, the USA aluminums. So those, they're small too, right? Because most of the competitive clamps, they're really big and blocky. They are super strong. They do not move. And I've done Steinborn tipping the bar with over 300 pounds, and they don't move. So probably your best bet for functionality with some of this stuff, get yourself a pair of these, and then you'll be able to do all this cool shit without feeling limited as much. Make sure I'm clear here. I actually can twist even more. You can feel it. So I'm going to let that happen. That's funny, the finish there. People think that's a gimmick. It was actually the rule. So if there was competitive lifting and stuff, even just one hand pressing and all these things, like you do it and then the feet come together to show that you've owned the weight. It's easy enough, I think, like for me, I could just do side press and seated bent presses like accessory work in a session. And you're nailing a lot of those things, but now I'm getting into bent pressing. Higher skill, you need focus. So you're not gonna just like start bent pressing. Like you could, but like to go do your workout, exhaust yourself, or to even just like try to do it between tasks. Like we need to be dialed in, thinking about what we're feeling, trying to be very present with our body and how we feel about the way we're moving around the weight in order for that to be successful. My left is starting to feel better, like it's opening up, but we'll see. And the big one's just getting rotated enough around the bar for me. Now, even just like where you're setting your hand plays a role here, right? So like, this is very much the same as like bench pressing and things like that, where like I don't want the bar like right into the meat of the hand or like the center of the hand. I want to put it down a little lower so that it's on the bones. So I feel like I have a chance to actually press that out, right? So just little details like that, they all play a role here in like how you're going to finish the weight. My body's like trying to just do the right. It's like, no, man, like we're going to do the left. Fuck off. Smoother though, eh? And this is one of the problems I have, is that it's not just the feet and the body weight shifting this way. It's like a lot of the arm too, right? So the thing there, like once I get stacked over my hip, as I start to move this way, we want to start to create some separation so that I stay stacked. And on some of mine, you can probably see like I'm not going heavy enough now where that would be affected. So some of them I am starting to, and I just control it. Whereas as I go heavier, I need to move that into place.
Stacked.
Yeah, to stay stacked. I've been watching The Office a lot.
Yeah.
It's like probably my third or fourth time going through that. Just comes in waves, right? Like everyone starts talking about how good it was again. And then you start watching, you're like, fuck, this was a good show. And if you've ever worked in an office setting, like I have, you're like, it's so accurate. Like a lot of it is like so accurate, so it makes it timeless. But what is interesting though is I was thinking the other day, it's like how like organic content is often the stuff that like people want to see more of. It very much is kind of like that same, it was like the first time we were presented like organic type, it was pre-planned, but it was like, you know, just like real shit. And we love that stuff, I think, just because we're all doing that. We're living these real reality lives, or watching people that you think, you know, everything's perfect all the time.
No, it's true.
It's not. Because that's enough weight for me to use better technique. But I mean, I could use more weight. The strength does start to matter now, where it's like, I need to put some time into, before I try something more, like I almost locked out 115 last time I was training it. That's 100. I spent time just getting stronger again in my shoulder. And I've been doing that, but just more specifically. Like, I just think it would be a bit silly for me today to try that if I haven't been training it. But for me to know that I can work up, you know, solid 100-pound barbell, old-time bent press any day, like for the most part I have been able to, feels pretty good to balance out with all the other training modalities I've been doing, and mobility plays a big role in that. Obviously my left side's not up to par Still a lot of work to do there, but just the regressions and stuff you see me do today, all that, you know, that helps keep the health of this limited side going.